Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first UPUA's Executive Town Hall of the 15th Assembly. My name is Aphrodite Biswas, and I serve as the Executive Director of Outreach. And I want to welcome all of you for joining us here today for the Town Hall. We are looking to answer a lot of questions that the student body has been having all through summer. We will be addressing the back to state plans of the university and a few questions related to that. And then we will also be talking about the systemic racism issues that have been faced by the university for years now, and even within the UPUA. We also have questions related to that we are willing to answer here today. And finally, we will be addressing the summer updates that UPUA has been up to, and we will also be talking about some involvement opportunities with UPUA for the coming year. For the past week and a half, we kept a question e-form open, and we've had students submit questions, which we will be addressing at the town hall today. For our panelists, we have President McKay. Zach here is the student body president. I'm sure all of y'all know him by now, and he's been kind enough to be here with all of us and address all the questions that we've been having. Joining him, we have Vice President Lexy Pathickal, and she too will be assisting Zach with answering these questions. So I want to turn it over to them for the opening remarks, and then we can get into the discussion topics soon after.
All right, well, hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our first executive town hall of the year. Lexy and I are so excited to get to talk with you, but I would very much so like to begin by thanking our Executive Director of Outreach, Aphrodite Biswas, and the members of the Department of Outreach for helping coordinate tonight's event. We are incredibly hopeful to host many more of these in the future, as we truly believe that listening to you, your voice, and your concerns is our utmost responsibility.
For many of us, the return to campus looks really different from in the years past, whether you're living on campus or somewhere nearby. As the UPUA, we're working to disseminate the new policies and guidelines put into place by the university, borough, and state to all students so that they are all aware throughout the year.
In terms of academics, we are advocating for students on roundtables, task forces, and conversations with administration. We want to continue to hear from you about what you think is necessary or important during these times, so our legislating is on par with student interests.
For first-time students, we will do our best to welcome you to University Park from a distance, and we're working to recruit and welcome first-time students to join the student government to start their important advocacy at Penn State. Internally, we are working hard to ensure our members and interactions are all in line with the safest practice and guidelines, including having meetings remotely over Zoom for the foreseeable future. Our office is still accessible to students via the hub, but we have to put into place social distancing measures that will reshape what that looks like. We encourage students to search our list of resources on our website, which is www.upua.org.
Here at the UPUA, our staff, our team, and our legislative representatives are made and consisted of entirely University Park students, and we are genuinely concerned and anxious to see what the semester experience will bring for not only us here in the UPUA, but for you as students who we serve. We also want to make sure that we remain hopeful that Penn State's tradition of honor and excellence can be celebrated and continued throughout the next year. Moving into the dorms today myself, I can tell you it might not necessarily be the most enjoyable thing to wear a mask while moving all of those boxes through the Happy Valley heat into our new dorms and off-campus apartments. But it's something that we all must not only embrace, but truly practice on a day-to-day basis when choosing to come back to school, given that our utmost priority must be keeping our friends and family safe.
Over the next hour, we want to discuss some of the most asked and important questions surrounding our return to campus, which I know has been asked for the past 6 months. Thank you to those who submitted questions and comments using our submission form, and we will give time at the end for participants to ask us questions directly.
Thank you for your opening remarks, Zach and Lexy. Moving into our main topics of discussion. The first one that I would like to address is the university's back to state plans. We've had several questions posed about this particular issue by our students through the question e-form. But before we go into the questions, I want to talk about three main areas, if you could help me out with that. The first one is, what is UPUA's take on the entire back to state plans? How do we feel about that? Zach, would you like to address that?
Sure. Thank you, Aphrodite. It is definitely a broad question for a very broad topic. Returning to state is obviously something that the university has put a lot of time and effort into coordinating and is now obviously in the process of executing. As students, we've done, rather as student leaders in those conversations advocating on behalf of students, we have done our best to ensure that student safety is at the utmost concern of those conversations, and making sure that our processes for when we return to campus are above any other universities that we know of, so that we can ensure that safety moving forward. Personally, I was very unsure as to whether or not we should return to campus. I still feel relatively unsure as to what that's going to look like. The final decision, as I'm sure you're all pretty aware, was not necessarily the student government's. Our job is to make sure that once the university's responsibility in deciding that we should go back was made, that we are here to push for the safety and the well-being of students following that decision's happening. So some things that we have been pushing for a while now in conversations, and which I know that many representatives in the UPUA are now actually investigating pushing on a larger organization-wide stance, include ensuring that alternative grades are something that students can look for this fall semester, given that the reasoning that we had them implemented in the spring was for a quick transition to online learning. And even though students have had more time to prepare for what a back to state situation might look like this fall, and thus more time to prepare, we still feel that alternative grades help provide at least some closure for students who are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, such as, for example, not being able to return to campus at all and partaking entirely online. Those students must not be forgotten, and so are of the utmost concern. Tuition is another very large piece of this. Obviously, the question as to returning to campus affecting the quality of education which students are getting has been brought up by us in conversations and by others throughout the university community. The answer that we've been given from administration time and time again is the general number of options which students have at University Park via their online classes. Even if we move online, they argue, the tuition makes sense given the fact that those courses are still only offered at University Park and help ensure that the university is able to continue paying with a fair respect to what they deserve, the professors, faculty, and staff that they can continue to help students with throughout the semester. That said, I believe it is still worth something worth looking into as to whether or not that tuition could be budged. I think that the conversations have definitely led us towards a path where that might be something that is doable, but it ultimately comes down to what ends up happening with the university over the next few weeks. The Mask Up or Pack Up campaign is another conversation which we've been involved in. This is something where, really emphasizing that once this decision has been made by the university, our job is really as student leaders to push for safety and protocol following within the student body. And so ensuring that students are adhering to local, state, and university health and safety guidelines outlined not only in those Mask Up, Pack Up campaigns, but also in the COVID-19 Compact is incredibly important. And over the next few weeks, the UPUA will disseminate that information across our social media channels and other forms of communication. Obviously, failure to comply with those sorts of guidelines, such as wearing a mask in any university entity which requires it, staying 6 feet away from other students on campus, can ultimately force the school and businesses that depend on the students across the state here at University Park to close, and thus causing economic and social and moral situations which none of us really would like to be in at all. So it's absolutely crucial that information is passed along. It's important that we ask, especially on the days where we're really questioning whether or not we ought to wear a mask, or whether or not it's important that we ask our friends before we go over maybe to their apartment if they've tested negative for COVID-19. It's important to remember that students are really the backbone of this university, and as such need to be doing everything that they can to ensure that we are keeping each other safe and sound. A lot of this is on us, but I want to make it clear that the university's decision to go back is the university's decision and responsibility alone. I mean, that's something that must be addressed in full.
Thank you for explaining all of that, Zach. I believe it was very helpful, not just for me, but for all other students as well. Another thing that a lot of students are confused about or have been asking about is the temporary COVID-19 mask wearing and gathering limit ordinance that has been brought up in the state college borough. So if Lexy, if you could address that, please, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so this campaign has essentially extended to off-campus, which as someone who lives off-campus, I'm very excited to hear about this. So essentially what this temporary COVID-19 mask wearing and gathering limit ordinance does is that you do have to wear your mask at all time, always while outside and distancing, indoors while in contact with people and other household members, and in all transit/transport vehicles. So that means any bus that you get onto, even if you're taking a car, it is just for your own safety to wear a mask. No waiting lines more than 10 people, and they must distance at least 6 feet between each other. And then there's a maximum of 10 people gathering in households. That means indoor and outdoors, and a 25% limit for gatherings in open public spaces. And these will be enforced. Also, that means downtown, off campus, not only on campus. So the fine for a person or business not in compliance with the measures outlined in the ordinance is subject to a $300 fine. And this is to make sure that the State College Borough is also staying safe in this time. Obviously, Penn State can enforce their rules on campus, but I think it's also really important that the borough is kind of taking the same tasks at place and also enforcing these guidelines to make sure that the community at large is as safe as well. There's a lot of faculty, there's a lot of elderly members that live in our community, so it doesn't limit us to on campus. This is a really community effort all around. So I am personally in support of this campaign, especially downtown. But yeah, that's kind of a little bit of an explanation as to what the State College Borough is also doing.
Thank you so much for that, Lexy. So coming on to the major questions that we received on the topic of back to state plans of the university. The first one, this was pretty common on Twitter as well, and we also received these questions via the e-form. And the question being, is the COVID-19 compact that the students were made to sign, is that a legal document?
I can take this. It is not. It was, according to the university and its administrators, never designed to be a legal document. And that concern was raised by me as soon as I was made aware of the compact. I think when it comes to language, especially in a time like this, clear communication is absolutely critical. We can't be telling students, you need to acknowledge that the university doesn't have responsibility over the health and well-being of its students, when at the same time students are unsure as to what that semester is going to look like. Its policies aren't very clear or transparent. It frankly seemed a little, it seemed rushed, and it didn't seem as though student input had been taken into consideration. So after further conversations and sort of pushing the idea that this, if it is meant to be a pledge rather than, or a social commitment rather than some kind of legal compact, then that should be what's emphasized the most. They were they were receptive to the concerns that we had brought up about it coming off as legalese, and sort of just dishing all responsibility away from the university. And so they changed it to sort of reflect that. But at the same time, I wish that more student input was taken in from the beginning, because I think that general confusion and miscommunication could have been avoided at the very beginning.
Thank you for that answer, Zach. The next question that we've received regarding this topic is, how will these measures be enforced on campus and off campus? Will police have the power to enforce it, or who would? So Lexy, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, with on-campus enforcement, it's largely in correlation with Penn State. So actually one measure that can be taken is that if there are students not following the guidelines, for example, not wearing a mask in their classroom, not wearing a mask on campus or any of the buildings, you can be reported to student conduct and they will take it from there. And it's a very serious process. It's not taken lightly, and I think this is a responsibility that Penn State has taken on to make sure that enforcement is strong. Also, in terms of other enforcement, there are paid student public health ambassadors. They will be going around campus, just reminding people to wear their masks, to social distance, in the cases that they see that there are people that are not doing that. But they're also not kind of policing it. It's also kind of like a positive reinforcement too for those who are wearing masks. I don't know, it's a campaign to draw the entire community together and everyone on Penn State together. So it's just to make sure that everyone is safe. And then in talks with Vice President Sims, police will only be called when absolutely necessary. So in that, that is more pertinent to downtown.
Again, thank you so much for that answer. If you guys have any other questions regarding this particular topic, please feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A room here, and we will get back to those questions at the end of the town hall. Moving on to the next topic that we hope to address through this town hall is the systemic racism issues that have been faced by Penn State and has been observed within the UPUA. In response to all of this, UPUA has been working with several other organizations on campus and even internally to address these issues. And the first one that I want to talk about is the Change the Code campaign that was led by UPUA, the Black Caucus, and a few other organizations in the beginning of summer. Lexy, could you please tell us a little bit more about that one?
Yeah, so this campaign primarily was stemmed from the fact that earlier in the year, there were 2 students who were found to be actively posting racist remarks, or even saying them in a video or posting something racist in a picture. And there was public outrage about this, and rightfully so. So in return, there was a campaign created called Change the Code. This was primarily led by Black Caucus, and the NAACP and UPUA signed on to help support the campaign and spread the message as well. Luckily, from this campaign, the university administration decided to also create a task force for the student conduct to be reviewed. This task force is headed by Nyla Holland, who is the president of Black Caucus, as well as a Professor Shobha Sivaprasad Wadia, a clinical professor of law and associate dean for diversity. So there's many students on this task force, as well as other administrators, and we actually have invited them, to Nyla and Shobha, to come to a special presentation for UPUA on September 3rd, 2020. So our meetings are public and they will be held over Zoom. So if anyone wants more information about what the task force has been up to, that is available to attend and see as well. And in addition, they have office hours every Wednesday at noon, and they are super available to have a conversation and also provide updates to what is going on. So that's something that actually happened in the past 6 months, and it's crazy to think that it's only been 6 months, but that is actively going on, and I'm excited to see what results are created from this task force.
Thank you for that answer, Lexy. So this is a campaign that we, all of us at UPUA, are really excited about, and we're excited to see the change that this campaign has already been bringing. The next thing that we would like to address is the Instagram account Black at Penn State. There were several posts regarding UPUA on that, and I want to make sure that we're being mindful of what we've seen there, and I would really like Zach to address that for us.
Most certainly. So obviously over the summer, we've been seeing posts of pain and sorrow and frustration from students who have been oppressed from a systemic racism problem within the university and the organization that is the UPUA as a whole. These have been gut-wrenching, to say the least, as the representative of the UPUA, which is an organization designed to represent the student body in its entirety, each and every student. It was absolutely painful to hear that a lot of the disparity between different sections of the organization in years past were fueled by this underlying racism of its members, and some of its processes sort of furthering that as well. And so I, from the very beginning, wanted to make sure that we had the leadership on the same page, that this needs not only to be addressed, but needs to be corrected so that this organization can move forward with a firm stance on anti-racism, of inclusion, of celebration for differences, and in general, creating an environment which encourages students to not only advocate on behalf of all students better than they have in years past, but to encourage that advocacy is, directed at the right things, that it's directed at really helping students rather than just, supporting something that might have already been done, or that's sort of just, half of what we ought to be really pushing. And so I want to make sure that it's clear that we apologize for the organization's history on behalf of the current administration and all past administrations. I think there's been a general lack of empathy from the UPUA in its former administrations and in its former assemblies. And even prior to the UPUA, we've only been around since 2006, but before us, the USG has been around since the 60s. I mean, I can only imagine what sorts of systemic racism was found within that organization. The UPUA is not alone. Nearly every organization at Penn State has, in one way or another, been, highlighted as an organization which helps further those white supremacy, in general, those racist systems at Penn State. And while I think the UPUA is not different from organizations in that sense, it is different in that it has a responsibility to do more because it's not just a club, it is in every way the student government, and ought to represent you and advocate for you as best it can. So in meeting with leadership, the Speaker of the Assembly, the leader of the legislative branch, and the Chief Justice, the leader of the judicial branch, as well as my Vice President, Lexy Pathickal here, and other members of the UPUA's leadership team met to discuss the sort of steps that we as an organization can take in all of our various branches and in all of how that works. So some of those things and some progress on them include what we're doing tonight, ensuring that we are making ourselves available as executive representatives and as legislative representatives to hear the concerns of the student body, knowing that a post on Black at Penn State cannot and should not be the first time that representatives are becoming aware of the problems that students of color face at this predominantly white institution that is beloved, but at the same time deeply flawed. We do need to make sure that such town halls are being hosted, and I'm incredibly excited to see that the Department of Outreach is already doing such a fantastic job. Shout out Aphrodite on getting in touch with students from the executive. And I'm excited to see what sorts of town halls, especially constituency-based town halls for different colleges, for different community groups, will be held throughout the year by representatives to hear those concerns as well. Mandatory anti-racism training provided by the Office of Diversity and Resiliency at the University of El Paso. This is something which many members of the UPUA are engaged in right now. It's about a 6-hour-long training that the Office of Student Affairs recommended after undergoing, members of the Office of Student Affairs recommended after undergoing similar training this past year It is something which for the general public is free up to, I think it's like 5,000 users. The system itself has passed those 5,000 free uses, and any training right now will cost $45 per person. Quite frankly, I want to make sure that our members are undergoing this mandatory training on behalf of all of the branches as soon as possible. But I also want to make sure that the student fee dollars, which students are being, which have paid, are going towards advocacy for changes around the university, right? I think that in general, I think this is something which is an internal change within each of us, and which I know that the members of the UPUA need to endure. But with seeing the fact that they'll have another training opening up in September, I believe it's September 15th, the entirety of the rest of the organization who haven't engaged in that training yet will be able to do so free of charge, with nothing changing in terms of the training's quality or anything like that, but ensuring that we can continue to put our money literally where our mouths are with our advocacy on behalf of you. A whistleblower policy and robust judicial board operating system and reporting system with due process. This is really interesting. The judicial board of the UPUA hasn't really taken many opportunities to facilitate hearings and the like for different members of the UPUA, though it's something that the Constitution enshrines is its right and can do so at any time. And so sort of reviewing this, we found that some of the concerns related to hearings revolved around the time in which an incident might have occurred and in which the judicial board might be able to investigate. And so the J board is currently looking to expand that time so that instances of hate and bias can be addressed through a formal hearing process from instances going back long ago, as opposed to just recently. I think the current timeline is like 30 days, which is, I think, outrageous. But there's also a complaint system, which you can go onto the UPUA's website right now, scroll under the judicial branch and file a complaint. There's documents there that explain what that process is and how it looks. So you can download that and submit it to the judicial board to file any formal investigation that you would like to see happen. The Constitution enshrines what sort of outcomes can happen from those hearings, but we're currently working with the Office of Student Conduct to ensure that all of those repercussions are within our jurisdiction as a student organization. But I want to make sure that that we hold our representatives and our members of the executive and judicial branches as accountable as possible to the words that they use and other actions that they do. UPUA-wide guided discussion on bias and discrimination. The leadership just met, I think it was a week and a half ago, with Carlos Wiley and Peggy Laura to discuss what this will look like. And right now, myself, the leader of the legislative and the leader of the judicial, are discussing what that discussion will look like, and when it will most likely be held. I imagine if not this upcoming week, because it's the first week of school, then the week after will be the opportunity for the UPUA to really come together and discuss what its current members are seeing, some of the flaws of its organization are, and its processes are. Mandated readings and group discussions for UPUA leadership. The Racial Healing Handbook, which was required by that commitment to anti-racism, have been delivered to all members of the steering committee, which is made up of the chairs of each legislative committee, as well as the executive directors, the heads of each executive department, myself, the speaker, and the Chief Justice. And we will be meeting beginning this upcoming week to discuss progress in that workbook and really dig into our own internal biases and how we can work to deactivate those as we move forward throughout these leadership roles. I would encourage, and if possible, require all future leadership to undergo that similar interrogation of their own biases as well. Excuse me. And then lastly, institutionalizing bias training as part of the workshop, registration workshop for incoming candidates is something which the Judicial Board's Election Commission is looking to carry out over the next year. Seeing as elections are obviously some time away, they are still figuring out how that works within the elections code, but I'm certain that the judicial board will be able to carry that out within this upcoming semester and ensure that moving forward, anybody who wants to represent students has to spend time interrogating their biases so that even when campaigning, you're aware of your thoughts or of your actions, of your words and how they impact students around you and how you will eventually advocate for.
Thank you so much for addressing this, Zach. And I personally am really excited about the progress we're making and the small steps that we're taking towards anti-racism within the UPUA. So one question that we've received regarding this is, what measures will UPUA establish in the case of members being faced with racial discrimination allegations? And what would the process for that member be? So could one of you please take that question? Thank you.
I could take it. I'm sorry, about the, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So the question was, what measures will UPUA establish in the case that that a member of UPUA is being faced by racial discrimination allegations? So pretty much what the due process looks like.
Mhm.
And yeah.
So that's sort of what the complaint system that I was referring to earlier gets at, right? So any student who's an undergraduate member of the student body here at Penn State's University Park campus can submit a complaint regarding an issue with racial discrimination or bias against any member of the UPUA at the UPUA's website under Judicial Board and then file a complaint. We're currently working to really revamp our website to house a lot of those important links at the front main page of our website, but for now, that's where you can find it. The Office of Student Conduct is providing general counsel as to what the J Board will be able to do following those hearings, but it really comes down to what students are reporting, right? So if somebody comes forward and they say, you know, this incident happened in a room full of other students and I'd like to mention them as witnesses, and they'd be more than happy to come and talk, the J Board will investigate that to its fullest ability and provide either the General Assembly or the leader of the leaders of the organization a report on what exactly can happen next. I am not too familiar with the Judicial Board's ability to automatically remove members, but I am familiar with the fact that that process will be able to take place as thoroughly as necessary.
Okay, thank you for that, Zach. The next question that we have with respect to systemic racism issues at Penn State is a rather interesting one. So one of our students asked this question: I want to know how the X on Latinx started at PSU. They want to know what the value is of including an X at the end of Latinx, instead of using words like Latina or Latino or something of that like. So Lexy, would you be able to answer that? Thank you.
Yeah, so I first want to preface by saying I can't speak for the community because I'm not a part of it, but I am a Spanish minor, so I study the language slightly. So my perspective is that with using the ending of O or A, it's to signify a masculine or feminine identity. So that is used for adjectives, that's used for nouns. So the X is actually implemented for providing those who don't fit within the binary or don't identify within the binary to use that that kind of language when they are identifying themselves or when they are using, different nouns and adjectives when they are speaking in Spanish. So that's where that is usually originated from. That's the knowledge of that. But I can't speak for the community, but what I will do is plug Latino Caucus, because Nicole Liara Andrade is the president and she's a good friend of ours. They actually have a lot of discussion topics like this and dialogue throughout the year. And I think this is actually a really good topic to bring up in within their organization. And I know she's very open to discussion like this. So I would really encourage you guys to go to meetings such as Latino Caucus, but also our chair of Justice and Equity, he is also of Latino background, so he would also like to have talk about this more and also get in touch with those who are more experts within the university, within the Multicultural Resource Center and such. So again, I don't want to speak for the community, but this is just my basic knowledge of why the term Latinx is used, but yeah.
Thank you for that answer. And I definitely agree, having more conversations with people who are more knowledgeable about this would definitely be helpful. Again, if you have any other questions related to this, please feel free to put them in the Q&A room that we have for this webinar. Moving on, I want to talk about the summer updates for UPUA and opportunities for you guys to get involved within the student government. So the first thing that I would like either Lexy or Zach to talk about is the Racial Justice Roundtable that we hosted over the summer, and talk a little bit about the new Committee on Justice and Equity for the 15th Assembly.
Yeah, so I'll take this question on. So in the 15th Assembly, there is a new committee, and it's a new standing committee called Justice and Equity, and its chair is Najee Rodriguez, who is a part of our steering committee as well and is a part of leadership. But this committee was newly created because formed from an ad hoc that we had for a couple months last year. We decided that there needed to be a committee that focused and tackled issues at the university that pertain to race, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, disability, or protected veteran status, or otherwise known as the protected classes at the university. So the committee has the ability to address the real and paramount issues within the realm of disability services, educational equity, and the instances of bias and discrimination. So with this past year and with the discussions that we've been having, this committee implemented the Racial Justice Roundtable, which they met 2 times over the summer, and it was basically a open space, a comfortable space where students of color could talk about their experiences at Penn State, the issues that they face, the racism that they face, and how we can have a discussion on how we can tackle that for the future and how we can make Penn State, which is a PWI, more inclusive for students of color who haven't felt welcome in the past. So this discussion is just a very safe space for those students of color to really talk about their experiences, and then for UPUA to use that to, have different initiatives, but also change the racism that is at Penn State and address the problems that Penn State has, and also have a more active stance in anti-racism as a university as a whole. And I think that really starts with the students, since we make up the university. So that was something that happened over the summer, and I actually attended both of them, and I believe it was a really productive conversation. I'm very excited for Chair Rodriguez to continue these kinds of initiatives throughout the year.
Thank you for explaining that, Lexy. The next question, or the next area that I want to talk about is how UPUA is addressing the turmoil against international students that was taking place over the summer. And since a lot of our international students are not going to be able to make it to campus, what are we doing as the student government to help them? Zach, if you could please take that one.
Definitely. So as I'm sure many of you have now seen, the UPUA was one of the signers of this Big Ten student government initiative to support international students with regard to ICE's decision announcing recent policy changes. We came together with the firm belief that the international student community at all of our campuses are not only crucial, but are and always ought to be fought for as though they're family. They are. Our university's community is not complete without them. And at the end of the day, that sort of advocacy needed to be there. And I intend to ensure that continued advocacy that spans not just University Park, but across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania through state-related institutions such as the Pennsylvania Association of State-Related Students, and across the nation through the Association of Big Ten Students continues as well, because that advocacy must and does transcend just our University Park campus. That said, students who are coming from international countries to University Park do need that sort of support as well. Obviously in advocacy, but feeling as though they're welcome members of the family. One of the ways in which the 3 of us, actually, Aphrodite, myself, and Lexy, work to foster that sort of a community last year was by creating the Penn State PALS program, which is a mentorship program, a pen pal mentorship program for incoming international students to help get accustomed to the culture and life here in State College, and specifically on the University Park campus. So it pairs current international students with incoming international students, and we work very closely and collaboratively with the International Student Council to achieve this. I'm excited that this year the ISC and Office of Global Programs, as well as the Council of Commonwealth Student Governments, are excited to begin discussions on expanding this to some of our Commonwealth campuses throughout the state of Pennsylvania to ensure that that welcome feeling is not just here at University Park, but at all of Penn State's campuses.
Thank you for this program. I, being an international student myself, I'm really excited to see something like this in place. The next thing that I want to shed some light on is the PSU Votes Fellowship. This is something that the current administration started over this summer, and I really want to know a little bit more about that, and I'm sure a lot of other students do as well. So Zach, if you could please talk a little bit about the Votes Fellowship.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I'm incredibly excited about the PSU Votes Fellowship and about the Department of Civic Engagement at large. One of the things that I found last year as sort of at the helm of the Governmental Affairs Committees, as chair of the Governmental Affairs Committee, was that our voter registration engagement and educational efforts weren't necessarily housed under a clear entity and weren't sustainable from year to year, right? So as new representatives were elected to serve as representatives of the student body and happen to serve on the Governmental Affairs Committee, each year they'd essentially have to learn up on what it meant to engage students and the like in civic engagement. Whereas this year, we're really looking to ensure that that experience can transfer from year to year, even if you didn't run in an election. You know, I don't think a lot of the students who are interested in the PSU Votes Fellowship, especially right now, we're very interested in running in UPUA elections. And so I'm excited to see that new process sort of take shape this year under the executive branch. The fellowship itself is sort of the work of two of my favorite people, Tom Doherty III, the chair of the Governmental Affairs Committee, and Representative Noah Robertson, who I believe is joining us tonight. Representative Robertson and Doherty really worked their tails off to ensure that students had an opportunity to get engaged in civic engagement, given the fact that this is one of the most important years and times of our lives to get engaged, get informed, and help others get engaged and get informed, as well as participate in our nation's civic processes. The fellows are engaged in a few different projects right now. Many of them are focused on benchmarking right now across our peer Big Ten institutions and other institutions across the country. Things like, you know, election day leniency, but specifically under this administration, an interest in university holidays on election days, something which, you know, we might not be able to see come about this fall, but which we can most certainly look to implement in the spring and in future elections moving forward, as well as automatic voter registration for all University Park students, perhaps integrating that into the move-in process, perhaps out of COVID times, as well as making sure that every student gets a voter registration sheet in their mailbox through the Center for Character, Conscience, and Public Purpose. We're incredibly appreciative of the support that the center has given us along the way. You know, PSU Votes is really a beautiful example of where university and student interests line up. The university is, by law, required to encourage, via good faith effort, civic engagement on campus. And the center is really their way of doing it. And within the UPUA, although it's not legally required, I see that as being just as important. And so the Department of Civic Engagement is our way of helping there. Together, PSU Votes, I really think, will begin to thrive like it never has before. And it'll be all thanks to folks like Representative Robertson and the PSU Votes Fellowship.
Thank you for your answer, Zach. The last thing that I want to talk about is involvement opportunities with UPUA within the next year. So if Lexy, if you would like to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'll start with saying it's been an interesting time being in COVID, but that did not stop the work that Zach and I have been doing, especially in developing the organization as much and inclusive as possible. There will be many positions open and available for first year students to apply to with different staffing positions, but also we have kind of changed our executive structure into different departments. So as Zach mentioned, there's the Department of Civic Engagement, there's the Department of Sustainability, and the Department of Outreach, which our lovely executive director is on. So within these organizations, they are now, instead of director, they are renamed to executive director, so that their titles are a bit more understanding across the board. And then from there, there are different directors within each of these departments that have their own expertise and focus, just so that we can get that much more work done, but also have that many more conversations throughout the university. So I'm super excited to see just how much UPUA grows throughout the year, but to learn more and to see more about what UPUA is like and what we do on a day-to-day basis, or if you want to apply, go to upua.psu.edu and you will be directed to our page with all the information.
Thank you. Also, it's upua.org. So make sure you go on to the Get Involved tab on our website, and you should see all the open positions for the year. Going off of that point of discussion, a question that we received from one of our students is, when can we meet the newest members of UPUA? If one of you would like to answer that one.
I can take it. So with the Department of Outreach being a relatively new, actually, it is a brand new department. This past year, the 14th Assembly of the UPUA created it via constitutional change. And so we've never had a Department of Outreach before. This is really a great opportunity for it to serve as the conduit between the student body and the current members of the UPUA in any branch. So as the months go on, you'll find that more and more representatives will be able to host and will host their own town halls and help get to know exactly what the students who they represent would like to see being advocated for. There'll also be, through some sort of online engagement and online relations through the Department of Outreach, videos and other sort of introductory clips of its current members, whether they be directors in the executive branch or representatives helping represent you, or even judicial board justices, making sure that the processes by which we represent you and by which we carry out operations in the executive branch are ethical and following within our constitutional guidelines. You'll see more of that come about through our social media. But in the interim period of time, you can learn more about some of the roles in the UPUA and the people that hold them on upua.org, and then go to some of the different tabs, whether they be in the executive branch and learn about the departments, or in the legislative and learn about the representatives. The judicial board justices even have their own bios this year, so you can learn about them there too.
Again, the UPUA website is definitely the best resource to visit and find out more about the organization. Moving on, another question that we received is, what are the main goals of UPUA this year, and what sort of a plan do we have to achieve it on the larger picture? So Lexy, if you want to take that.
Yeah, so I think this year, let's just say the word unprecedented has been thrown around a lot, and I have to agree, because this is an unprecedented time. I think one thing that Zach and I have realized that although we want to get our platform done, the things on that we ran on, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that some of them may not be able to get done because we are in COVID-19 and we want to be safe and also keep our community members safe as well. So with that, I think it provides the UPUA to be flexible and versatile, and making sure that students are being communicated to the administration, listen to the concerns that are going on, try to address them as the year go on, and also work on the initiatives that we ran on as well. So it definitely requires us to be super flexible, but also have a head that have a focus on just moving forward and keep going forward, and no matter what happens, really. So with that, yeah, so I think that's kind of like the path that we have going forward. And no matter what comes our way, just know that UPUA is a resource to you. Know that Zach and I are very open to have conversations with any students that do have issues. And we have many members of our organization who are also open to conversation, discussion, disagreement, whatever it may be. So know that we are a resource to you in those times of trouble if you do face them this year.
I would also add that obviously flexibility is important within the initiatives that we pursue, but even in how we advocate for those initiatives, if nothing had changed, we want to make sure that this year helps sort of redefine the UPUA in terms of its impact and long-lasting changes that it brings about, making sure that our voices are heard, utilizing softwares which encourage grassroots organization and advocacy on behalf of not just the UPUA, but the entire student body, because ultimately, since everybody votes in the UPUA election, everybody's a member of the UPUA. And so there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get involved in our advocacy as well. You'll be able to see sort of what those grassroots efforts look like moving forward on the UPUA's website. Accessibility is also at our utmost concern, making sure that even in times of COVID, we are making sure our committees, our assembly meetings, and any other public meetings are accessible to the public via online mediums, and are safe to the members, which are currently are members of the committees and of the UPUA at large, as well as the student body. And then lastly, of course, making sure that the changes that we bring about are in fact sustainable and aren't just something that we're sort of crossing off a list or hoping to get done and have our name attached to it. They need to be real changes, and they need to be things that the student body genuinely needs.
Thank you for explaining UPUA's goals and plans for the rest of the year. One final question that we received prior to beginning the executive town hall was something that was on you guys' platform when you ran on your campaign platform. And this is about the status of implementing sustainable ice cream cups in the creamery. So our students want to know if we have an answer for that and what the progress of that particular initiative is at, if one of you would like to answer that question.
Yeah, so a lot of the initiatives which we ran on are heavily research-based, whether they be from other institutions across the Big Ten or across the nation. There's a lot of research which must be conducted when beginning an initiative like this, or frankly, even putting it on a platform. Now that the summer has sort of come and gone, I'm excited to see a lot of the work which our director of sustainable materials and products, Kelly Matuszewski, has been able to accomplish within the Department of Sustainability, and working with various members of the legislative branch in the General Assembly to ensure that the research that we have going into changing the cups in the creamery are in fact the way to go. There's a lot of life cycle analyses. There's a lot of in-depth discussions that have to be had as to whether or not, for example, compostables are in fact the most sustainable way to go about changing the creamery. Just very briefly, the data shows that in some cases, styrofoam might be more sustainable than composting materials in general, given the fact that the carbon footprint on styrofoam is not as large as it is on compostable materials. But that said, styrofoam isn't very sustainable either. And so it might be worth then looking into a reusable system, which then leads us into the problem of sanitation, which in the middle of a pandemic might not be the best way to go. So we want to make sure that we're not just sort of, again, attaching our names to something that's, oh, look, we switched to compostable materials for 1 week and now the creamery is sustainable, but rather that we're digging in with as much research as possible under the direction of Care Sidhu, the acting executive director of sustainability, and Kelly Matuszewski as the director of sustainable materials and products to ensure that we have the best way moving forward.
Thank you for explaining that. It is a rather complicated topic that, and you did a great job explaining where we're at with it. So with these questions and topics, we conclude whatever we received before the town hall. But right now, there's two more questions that we got throughout this town hall in our Q&A room, and I would like to take a quick minute to address those. The first one is with respect to the back to state policies and the mask up or pack up campaign. So the question is, are the consequences of not wearing a mask by the university released to the student body yet? And wouldn't knowing the consequences of wearing a mask help with transparency? So if one of you could take that question, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so I can actually tackle that. So in conversation with the different administrators that we've been talking to in the past couple of months, I mentioned that student conduct will have the power to discipline these students simply because if they aren't complying to the guidelines, there's actually a part in the student conduct saying failure to comply, and that's why the student conduct is brought into this conversation. So with that being said, I think oh goodness, I just had a blank. But in terms of enforcement, the student conduct, as what administrators have told us, is that suspension could be on the board or even expulsion could be on the board. It's not something that's taken very lightly with them, especially with students who are refusing to follow the guidelines. So that is, it's not light enforcement. It's definitely going to be strict to make sure that everyone is staying safe and to keep the community safe. So that's the extent of what can happen, but that's not it's not limited to that to say. But I think being transparent to these options and kind of saying to students, this is what could happen by not following guidelines, I do agree, helps with the transparency of it as a university, but also so students know what the repercussions are if they do decide to take that route.
Thank you for addressing that question. The next one that we have is with respect to racism issues within the UPUA. And the question reads, would the UPUA be open to doubling the number of community seats to combat bias within the organization? If again, one of you could take that question, that would be great.
Definitely. I think so specifically the number of community seats is up to the judicial board as far as I'm aware, and the constitution that the assembly sets. That said, I do see there being a benefit to at least exploring that option. I think a lot of the problems with regard to diversity within the Assembly of Representatives comes from kind of a flawed election system, and the fact that the elections aren't really advertised as such until early in the spring. In fact, it's even been taboo within the UPUA to talk about elections if you're a representative in the months leading up to the election, which of course benefits the few historically white students who aren't necessarily as afraid to kind of break the rules and ask their mentors about questions regarding the elections. And so making sure that our elections information is posted on the website as it is now, with greater emphasis on advertising to communities of color come election time as well, I'm hoping will intensify the diversity within the assembly, but at the same time, making sure that those voices are guaranteed through the doubling up of community group seats is something that I think is something that could be explored. It's not something that we unfortunately can just implement right here and now. Obviously representatives are one way to serve within the UPUA, but serving within the executive branch and the judicial board is also tremendous ways to serve the student body through the UPUA. I think historically the General Assembly has kind of been viewed as, oh, you're in the UPUA if you're a representative. But in reality, that would be like saying, oh, you work for the government if you serve as a congressman, when it's like, no, you can work for the government and do a lot of things, and in so doing, make the UPUA a overwhelmingly diverse group of students, as opposed to just who's elected in the elections.
Again, thank you so much for your answer, Zach. And so this brings us to the end of all the questions that we had for today's town hall. If you have any other further questions, feel free to email it to us at outreach@upua.org, as well as at president@upua.org and vice president@upua.org, depending on who you want to pose the question to. So all of that being said, I want to thank all of our students for joining us today, and a huge shout out and thanks to Zach and Lexy for being here and addressing all our concerns and questions. We will also be putting up bits and pieces of the recordings from today's town hall on our social media really soon. So if you weren't able to attend it today, you can always go back and watch it on highlights on our social media. Once again, thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you so much and good night.
Thank you.